The most dangerous villains aren't always found in dark alleys or hidden behind locked doors. Sometimes they sit across the street. Sometimes they wear a smile, while holding the power to decide who gets to belong, and who suffers for daring to resist. Jacob Reed was only 14 when his life was nearly stolen. Not by fate, not by sickness, but by one neighbor's obsession with control. And when his father, Daniel, discovered what had been done, he swore that this battle would not end in silence, because silence is what tyrants rely on. And Daniel had already buried one loved one too many. This is not just the story of a father and a son. This is the story of how a neighborhood discovered that power without mercy can become the most dangerous weapon of all, and how one man's determination brought that weapon crashing down. The house was too quiet. Daniel Reed knew silence. He had learned to live with it after his wife passed years ago. Some nights, he still half expected to hear her footsteps in the hallway, her laughter filling the kitchen. Silence had become a companion, a reminder, sometimes even a comfort. But this silence was wrong. It wasn't still. It was heavy, pressing against his chest with every step he took through the front door. "Jacob!" Daniel called out. His voice echoed in the empty space. No reply. He set his paramedic's bag down on the counter, scanning the room like he would a scene of an accident. The curtains swayed slightly in the evening breeze. A faint metallic smell, one he recognized instantly, hung in the air. Medicine. His stomach dropped. "Jacob!" His voice was sharper now, urgent. He found his son in the kitchen. Jacob was on the floor, one hand clutching his stomach, the other limp against the tile. His face was ghostly pale, lips trembling, sweat shining on his forehead. On the table above him, 3 insulin vials lay tipped on their sides. One was shattered, the others empty. A trickle of liquid still glistened in the sink, spiraling down the drain as if mocking the boy's desperate body. Daniel's training kicked in instantly, but this wasn't just another emergency call. This was his son, his only son. He dropped to his knees, lifting Jacob gently. "Stay with me, Jacob. Breathe. Just breathe, buddy." Jacob's eyes flickered open for a moment. His voice was barely audible, strained between gasps. "It was Mrs. Harris. She said no refrigerators, rules." Daniel froze. The name cut sharper than any blade. Linda Harris, the new HOA president. The woman who had swept into the neighborhood 3 months ago with charm, expensive suits, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was known for her standards, her endless rules, and her threats to fine anyone who dared ignore them. Daniel's blood boiled. Jacob's life depended on refrigerated insulin, and Linda had decided that no medical substances was more important than a child's survival. As the ambulance screamed toward the hospital, Daniel sat inside gripping Jacob's hand, refusing to let go. He kept whispering, "You're not leaving me too. I already lost your mother. You're all I've got, Jacob. Just hold on." At the hospital, doctors rushed Jacob into emergency care. A nurse pressed a hand to Daniel's shoulder. "You brought him just in time. 20 more minutes, and..." She didn't finish the sentence. Daniel didn't need her to. He had seen too many 20 more minutes. That night, he stood by Jacob's bedside, listening to the beeping monitors, watching the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Grief from years ago resurfaced. The moment his wife had slipped away despite every effort, every prayer. But this wasn't fate. This wasn't illness. This was deliberate. Linda Harris had crossed a line, and Daniel Reed was going to make sure she regretted it. The hospital room hummed with quiet machines, their steady beeping a fragile reminder that Jacob was still alive. Daniel sat in the chair by his son's bed, eyes fixed on the pale boy beneath the sheets. Every few minutes, Jacob stirred, mumbling incoherent fragments. Bits of memory, fear tangled with confusion. Daniel didn't sleep. He couldn't. Instead, he replayed Jacob's broken words in his mind. "Mrs. Harris, rules. No refrigerator." At dawn, the sky turned bruised purple, streaks of gold crawling across the horizon. Daniel stepped out of the hospital room. his shoulders heavy with exhaustion and fury. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the neighborhood HOA group messages. There it was. A post from Linda Harris herself, stamped just 2 weeks earlier. Effective immediately, no homeowners may store medical substances in outdoor refrigerators, garages, or sheds. This includes insulin and similar materials. Violations will result in fines and potential eviction for repeat offenders. We must keep our neighborhood free from unnecessary risks. Daniel read it 3 times, each word hammering against his skull. The arrogance, the cruelty disguised as order. He slammed his phone shut and leaned against the cold hospital wall. For the first time in years, he felt that old fire, the one that had kept him alive on chaotic emergency calls, the one that surged when a life hung in the balance. Only this time, the life was his son's. Linda Harris had to be stopped. 2 days later, Jacob was discharged with strict instructions. Rest, hydrate, and never miss another dose. Daniel hovered over him like a hawk, setting alarms for injections, triple-checking supplies. But in the quiet moments, while Jacob slept, Daniel's mind churned with another plan. He needed evidence. Proof that Linda wasn't just enforcing rules. She was endangering lives. Daniel read it 3 times, each word hammering against his skull. The arrogance, the cruelty disguised as order. He slammed his phone shut and leaned against the cold hospital wall. For the first time in years, he felt that old fire, the one that had kept him alive on chaotic emergency calls, the one that surged when a life hung in the balance. Only this time, the life was his son's. Linda Harris had to be stopped. 2 days later, Jacob was discharged with strict instructions. Rest, hydrate, and never miss another dose. Daniel hovered over him like a hawk, setting alarms for injections, triple-checking supplies. But in the quiet moments, while Jacob slept, Daniel's mind churned with another plan. He needed evidence. Proof that Linda wasn't just enforcing rules. She was endangering lives. Daniel started small. He collected screenshots of Linda's HOA posts. Every one of them dripped with self-importance. Lawns must be cut precisely once a week. No exceptions. Holiday decorations must be removed within 24 hours after the date. Children may not leave bicycles in driveways or sidewalks. First violation, fine. Second violation, removal. Neighbors had grumbled, yes, but few dared resist. Linda's charm was disarming. She hosted block parties with catered food and perfect music playlists. She smiled as she handed out newsletters filled with rules, and more rules. Daniel noticed something else, comments under her posts. A handful of neighbors tried to push back. This seems extreme. Linda, are you sure this is legal? But within minutes, their comments disappeared. Deleted. Silenced. Daniel's jaw tightened. He knew control when he saw it. This wasn't leadership. This was tyranny with a fresh coat of paint. One evening, as Jacob dozed in the living room, Daniel walked the neighborhood streets. Porch lights flickered on. Children's laughter echoed faintly in the distance, and sprinklers hissed against freshly mowed lawns. He stopped in front of Linda Harris's house. Perfectly trimmed hedges. A driveway without a single crack. Curtains drawn tight, like secrets hiding behind silk. Daniel pulled out his phone and snapped a photo. Then another. A woman's voice startled him. Careful. She doesn't like people looking too long. He turned. It was Mrs. Porter, an elderly widow who lived 2 houses down. She clutched her cardigan around her thin frame, eyes darting nervously toward Linda's porch. Evening, Mrs. Porter, Daniel said softly. She hesitated, then whispered, I heard about Jacob. I'm so sorry, Daniel. That boy's a blessing. Thank you, Daniel replied. His throat tightened. Do you know anything about the insulin rule? Her face paled. Linda brought it up at the last HOA meeting. Said medical supplies were hazardous and made the neighborhood look bad. Some of us protested, but... She wrung her hands. She has a way of twisting words. Makes you feel like you're the unreasonable one. People just gave in. Daniel studied her face. Fear lived in her eyes. You're not the only one who disagrees, he assured her. But if no one speaks up, she'll keep doing this. Mrs. Porter glanced toward Linda's house again. The curtains shifted just slightly. She's always watching, she whispered. Be careful, Daniel. She doesn't like being challenged. That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table surrounded by papers. He had begun building a case, screenshots, testimonies, photographs. He even recorded himself reading Linda's posts aloud, documenting every timestamp. As he worked, Jacob wandered in, blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Dad! His voice was small. Daniel pushed the papers aside. What is it, buddy? You should be resting. Jacob hesitated. Then, why does she hate us? The question pierced deeper than any knife. Daniel knelt beside his son, pulling him close. She doesn't hate you, Jacob. People like Linda, they love control. They think rules make them powerful. But listen to me. Daniel looked Jacob straight in the eye. She doesn't get to decide your life. No one does. Jacob nodded, though his eyes brimmed with uncertainty. Daniel hugged him tighter, silently vowing, I will not let her take anything else from us. And as the clock struck midnight, Daniel knew his fight had only just begun. The night of the HOA meeting arrived like a storm brewing on the horizon. Daniel walked toward the community center with Jacob's small hand in his. The boy was pale but determined. He'd insisted on coming, despite his father's protests. If this is about me, Jacob had said, his voice steady though his frame was fragile, then I want to hear it. The community hall was already buzzing when they stepped inside. Folding chairs scraped against the polished floor, neighbors chatted in hushed tones, and the faint scent of coffee and paper filled the air. At the front of the room, a long table stood like a judge's bench, and at the center of it sat Linda Harris. She looked every inch the queen she believed herself to be. Immaculate navy suit, hair pulled into a perfect bun, manicured nails tapping against a clipboard. Her smile stretched wide, but her eyes gleamed like steel. Welcome, neighbors, she announced smoothly, her voice carrying across the room without need of a microphone. It's wonderful to see such an engaged turnout tonight. Order, cleanliness, and unity. That is what makes our neighborhood shine. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. He waited, letting her revel in the applause of her loyal followers. Then he stepped forward. Linda, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. We need to talk about my son. The room stilled. Dozens of eyes swung toward him, curious, cautious. Linda's smile faltered for only a fraction of a second before recovering. Ah, Mr. Reed, always so passionate. Of course. Please, share your concerns. Daniel gestured toward Jacob, who clutched the back of a chair for balance. My son nearly died last week, because of your rule banning insulin storage. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with rage contained at a boiling point. Without refrigeration, his medication spoiled. He collapsed. He almost didn't make it. Gasps rippled through the audience. A woman covered her mouth. A man whispered to his wife. Linda's expression remained infuriatingly calm. Mr. Reed, I sympathize truly, she said, tilting her head in mock sorrow. But rules are rules. Exceptions create disorder, and disorder leads to decline. Surely you don't want our beautiful neighborhood to fall apart. Daniel took a step closer, his voice sharp. This isn't about lawn care or trash bins. This is about a child's life. My child's life. You put your obsession with appearances above basic human decency. For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed Linda's face. She straightened, her tone sharpening. Daniel, you're exaggerating. The rule was meant to protect the community. Hazardous materials. Hazardous. Daniel's laugh was bitter, cutting. Insulin isn't hazardous. It's life-saving. The only hazard here is you, sitting up there, pretending to lead while you endanger the very people you claim to represent. The room erupted. Some neighbors muttered in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably, torn between loyalty and truth. Mrs. Porter, frail but determined, rose from her seat. He's right, she said, her voice quavering but firm. Linda, we all saw what happened. We were scared to speak, but this has gone too far. A child could have died. Mrs. Porter, frail but determined, rose from her seat. He's right, she said, her voice quavering but firm. Linda, we all saw what happened. We were scared to speak, but this has gone too far. A child could have died. Linda's jaw tightened. Her smile cracked. Mrs. Porter, please sit down. You've always been so easily swayed by dramatics. But Mrs. Porter didn't sit. She folded her arms, eyes blazing with a courage that surprised even her. No more dramatics. No more silence. Another neighbor stood. Then another. Soon, voices overlapped, challenging Linda's authority, demanding answers. Linda banged her clipboard against the table, desperate to restore order. Enough! I am the elected president of this HOA. My word. Not anymore, Daniel interrupted, stepping closer to the front. His voice boomed with conviction, filling every corner of the room. You abused that title. You silenced us. You nearly killed my son. Tonight, this ends. The neighbors roared in agreement. Linda's face drained of color. Her power, once untouchable, was crumbling, slipping through her manicured fingers. And Daniel Reed stood at the center of it all, unwavering, as the community finally saw the truth. The meeting had detonated like a firecracker, but what followed was a slow, smoldering collapse of Linda Harris's empire. In the days after, the neighborhood was abuzz. Conversations once whispered in corners spilled openly onto sidewalks, into driveways, over backyard fences. Linda's name was no longer spoken with reverence. It was spat with bitterness. Daniel watched it unfold quietly, but he didn't rest. He knew people like Linda. When cornered, they didn't retreat gracefully. They doubled down. 2 nights later, as Daniel returned home from work, he noticed a paper pinned to his front door. The HOA letterhead glared at him in bold. He tore it free and read, "Notice of violation improper conduct at HOA meeting. Fines will accrue until further notice. Repeat disruptions may result in eviction proceedings." Daniel let out a dark laugh. Of course, Linda was lashing out. He crumpled the paper in his fist and marched inside, dropping it on the kitchen table. Jacob, seated with his textbook spread out, looked up. "What's that?" "Another scare tactic," Daniel muttered. "She's trying to make us back down." Jacob's eyes narrowed, the way a boy's did when he realized adults could be cruel. "So we don't back down, right?" Daniel's chest swelled with pride. His son had grown stronger through the storm, braver than most adults he knew. "Right," he said firmly. "We don't." The next HOA meeting was unlike any before. Instead of scattered attendance, the hall was packed to the brim. Neighbors who hadn't shown up in years came, faces lit with determination. Linda walked in, clipboard clutched like a shield. Her smile was gone. Her movements were sharp, brittle. She took her seat, but the power she once commanded was already gone. The room hummed with an energy she couldn't control. Daniel stood, holding a thick folder. "I've collected evidence," he announced. His voice was calm, steady, undeniable. "Every deleted comment, every silenced neighbor, every reckless rule you forced on us. And yes, your order that nearly killed my son." Gasps echoed again, but this time, no one defended Linda. He flipped the folder open, spreading printed screenshots across the table. Mrs. Porter leaned forward, reading aloud one of Linda's old messages. "Medical substances are unsightly and lower the value of our community." The words hit like a slap. Murmurs swelled, rising into angry shouts. Linda tried to interject, but the noise drowned her. She slammed her palm on the table. "You don't understand. Without rules, there's chaos. Without order, everything falls apart." Daniel turned to face her, his voice rising like thunder.
No, Linda.
Without compassion, everything falls apart. Silence. Heavy, damning silence. And then Sheriff Collins, who had quietly slipped into the back of the hall, stepped forward. His presence alone sent a shiver through the crowd. "I've been listening," he said evenly. And I've received multiple complaints. Harassment, abuse of authority, endangerment. His gaze locked on Linda. This isn't leadership. This is misconduct. And it ends tonight. Linda's face crumpled. She stammered, searching for words, for allies. But none came. Her loyal supporters avoided her eyes. Even her closest allies sank into their chairs, unwilling to catch the heat of her downfall. Sheriff Collins took her clipboard from her trembling hands. You're suspended from all HOA activity until further notice. The county will review these complaints formally. The room erupted, not in panic, but in applause. Relieved, defiant applause. For the first time, Linda Harris sat alone. No power, no control. Just a woman stripped bare before the community she had ruled with an iron fist. Outside the hall, the night air was cool, the stars sharp above. Daniel stepped into the parking lot with Jacob beside him. Dad, Jacob whispered, is it really over? Daniel looked up at the sky, exhaling slowly. Almost, buddy, almost, but we'll keep watch. Bullies don't give up easy. Jacob slipped his small hand into his father's. And in that moment, Daniel realized the war wasn't just about Linda. It was about teaching his son that strength wasn't measured in rules, but in standing up for what was right. The following weeks rolled by like a slow tide, carrying away the remnants of Linda Harris's reign. Her once feared presence in the neighborhood vanished. No clipped notes appeared on doors, no surveillance of lawns, no late-night messages demanding obedience. At first, the silence felt eerie, like the calm after a storm. But slowly, the quiet transformed into something else. Freedom. Neighbors began to speak more openly. Children played outside later than before. Garden chairs appeared on front porches. There was laughter where there had once been fear. And Daniel Reed, for the first time since moving into the neighborhood, felt like he belonged. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of amber, Mrs. Porter knocked on Daniel's door. She stood with a plate of cookies balanced in her hands, her frail frame lit with a smile. These are for Jacob, she said warmly. Tell him he's braver than most of us ever were. Daniel accepted the gift, his throat tight. Thank you, Mrs. Porter, for standing up that night. You started something. She chuckled softly. No, Daniel. You did. We were just waiting for someone strong enough to remind us we had a voice. Linda, meanwhile, had all but disappeared. The county's investigation into her abuse of authority spread quickly. She resigned in disgrace before formal charges could land. Her pride shattered. Some neighbors said she sold her house in secret. Others swore they saw her leaving town, her once pristine car packed with boxes, her eyes hollow. But in the end, it didn't matter where she went. What mattered was that she was gone. A month later, the community gathered in the same hall where the battle had taken place. But this time, the mood was different. Tables were decorated with homemade dishes, children darted between chairs, and music floated softly through the air. It was a celebration, not of victory over Linda, but of unity reborn. Daniel stood with Jacob beside him, watching as new HOA volunteers, ordinary neighbors, spoke about fairness, compassion, and cooperation. There was no grandstanding, no threats, just people choosing to look out for one another. Jacob tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, do you think it'll stay like this? Daniel looked around at the smiling faces, at Mrs. Porter laughing with a young couple, at Sheriff Collins chatting with neighbors like an old friend. Yes, he said, his voice firm but gentle. Because now everyone knows what happens when fear rules. And they've chosen something better. Jacob nodded thoughtfully, then leaned against his father's side. For the first time in months, his shoulders relaxed. Later that night, as the celebration wound down, Daniel found himself walking the quiet streets with Jacob at his side. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and distant barbecue smoke. He thought of his late wife, the woman who had always told him that courage was contagious. How right she had been. He glanced at his son, small but unyielding, and felt a surge of pride. You know, Jacob, Daniel said softly, You taught me something too. Jacob looked up, curious. What's that? That even when the odds are stacked against you, even when someone bigger tries to silence you, one voice can light a fire. Jacob's lips curved into a small smile. Then let's keep our fire burning. As they walked beneath the glow of the streetlights, Daniel realized this wasn't just the end of Linda Harris's rule. It was the beginning of something greater. A neighborhood rebuilt not on fear, but on trust. And perhaps, in that fragile trust, a lesson for anyone willing to hear it. Power is nothing without compassion. The storm had passed, but the story, their story, would echo in every laugh, every gathering, every small act of courage in the days to come.